Hi, I'm Steve Cook. One of my objectives in writing this blog is to bring the benefits of an academic approach to the Bible to the non-academic reader and to demonstrate some of the benefits of scholarship for general or non-scholastic readers of the Bible. In this series of video blogs, I plan to simply and briefly explain some of the academic terms which we frequently come across when reading scholarly literature about the Bible. And in this video, I'll look at a group of words which we could call the Deutero words. These are the words Deuteronomistic, Deuteronomic, Deuteronomy, Deuterocanonical, and yes, they're all hard to say. The term Deuteronomistic was devised by a German scholar in the 1940s, 1944, whose name was Martin Noth, and he argued that the books of Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings shared similar themes and terminology with the book of Deuteronomy, and therefore he called these books the Deuteronomistic history. He argued that they were probably written by an individual, a single author, who he called the Deuteronomist, as the writer was not identified. So the Deuteronomistic history is the term that is usually applied to these historical books of the Bible, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings, and sometimes the word is also used to talk about the themes and the phraseology of these books as being Deuteronomistic. The term, of course, comes from the book of Deuteronomy. The book of Deuteronomy is the fifth book of the Pentateuch, or in some Bibles we'll read the fifth book of Moses, commonly called the book of Deuteronomy. In Hebrew, the title of the book is Devarim, which means words. It comes from the opening words of the book of Deuteronomy. These are the words of Moses which he spoke to Israel. The word Deuteronomy in our Bibles is actually a Greek term, or two Greek terms, Deuteros and Nomos, combined, meaning the second law, as it's a retelling of the story that we find in the books of Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers. And so it's a repetition of some of these laws, but there are some laws which are unique to the book of Deuteronomy. Some of the key points, or the key themes of the book of Deuteronomy, is the emphasis on the law of kingship, a law which we don't find in the other books attributed to Moses. An emphasis on the centrality of worship. When they were coming to the land, they would be a place which the Lord would choose, which would be the center of worship. And also on blessings and cursings. The book has a series of blessings and cursings given by Moses to Israel, that if you keep the law, you'll be blessed in this way, and if you disobey the law, you'll be cursed in these ways. And this emphasis comes out in the books which we call the Deuteronomistic history. The term, which is very similar to it, Deuteronomic, is often used by scholars. Kurt Knoll, who is a scholar who deals a lot with the Deuteronomistic history and themes, says Deuteronomism, I said it was hard to say, Deuteronomism is the presence of words and phrases derived from the book of Deuteronomy that seem to affirm the ideology affirmed by Deuteronomy. And so this is a group of themes, words, phrases that occur in these other books of the Bible. Themes and phraseology found in or pertaining to Deuteronomy, but also found, for example, in the Deuteronomistic history, or Jeremiah, which is another book which many scholars argue is Deuteronomistic in its approach. Moshe Weinfeld wrote in a book, The Deuteronomy and the Deuteronomic School, he had a list which covered several pages of phrases which he argued were unique to these books and identified them as Deuteronomistic in their approach. Some of these phrases, for example, would be to go after other gods, or to worship other gods, to serve other gods, to worship foreign gods. There's a cluster of phrases that he says he argues are only found in these Deuteronomistic texts. The phrase, the site that the Lord would choose to make his name dwell there, or to put his name there, comes out of the law in Deuteronomy, but also we find that kind of terminology, that phrasing, used elsewhere in the Deuteronomistic histories, for example. Similarly, the city that the Lord has chosen is a Deuteronomistic phrase. To walk in the ways of the Lord, or to walk in his ways, is phraseology that only occurs in these books. And as the blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience appear at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, So we find in the Deuteronomistic history, for example, an outworking of this, so that when Israel kept the law, when they were obedient, they prospered, they were safe and secure. When they disobeyed the law, they were cursed in some way by being oppressed by their enemies or eventually going into captivity. Sometimes we come across this term Deuteronomic or Deuteronomistic with reference to other books of the Bible outside the Deuteronomistic history or the book of Jeremiah. For example, in the 12 prophets, what are called the minor prophets in many English Bibles, and the book of Jeremiah, sometimes we'll find references to Deuteronomistic or Deuteronomic layers or redactions. And this is based on a scholarly view that these books went through a series of or a process of editing and redaction, but they weren't necessarily written just at one stage, and what we have today is it's the form in which they were originally written, but rather later generations sometimes modified the books in the process of editing. And some scholars, such as Thomas Rumer, who is a Swiss scholar, argues that we can find evidence of later editing by a group that had Deuteronomistic or Deuteronomic ideas or the approach to the Bible. And so some of the themes which appear in the books of Deuteronomy and the Deuteronomistic history, we might also find in places like Jeremiah, the 12 prophets, because of the influence of a group of editors at a later stage who were also influenced by these books. Finally, I come to the term Deuterocanonical, which has nothing to do with the Deuteronomistic histories or the book of Deuteronomy. But it's the Greek word Deutero meaning second. It's a second canon. And so this term, Deuterocanonical, is often, or not often, is used to refer to what is sometimes called the books of the Apocrypha. Books such as Tobit, Judah, Baruch, the Wisdom of Jesus ben Sirah, the Maccabees, the Wisdom of Solomon, and additions to the books of Esther and Daniel. Often in the Catholic tradition, for example, the books that are called the Apocrypha in the Protestant tradition are called the Deuterocanonical books, simply a second canon, and has nothing to do with the books of Deuteronomy or the Deuteronomistic histories. So I hope that brief explanation explains the terminology which we'll come across very frequently and which I use quite often, especially when referring to the books of Kings or Chronicles, for example.